Well, hey, it's the Tanzu Talk Live for Thursday. What is this? October 1st? That's crazy. It's October. I always think of October as the month that has Halloween in it. I don't know what you do, but back in America land, we have Halloween where you go around and get candy for everyone. It's one of the kids' favorite holidays. You got your December holiday, your Christmas where you get a lot of presents. You get your birthday where you get presents. Now, my wife likes to give out presents on Valentine's Day, and then also Easter. And Halloween, no presents, but you get a costume, and then you get a bunch of free candy, which I think kids enjoy quite a bit. So today, I'm always trying to improve the way I'm doing these things here. So let me show you what I'm going for this time. Now let me get my my screen here. Oh, wrong one. So over there on the what is it? Thank God or thank golly, it's Kubernetes. They do that every Friday. They use this thing called HackMD, which kind of looks like this. You see, if you can go through. Ooh, I'm editing it, or you can do a split screen. But I thought I would collect together my thoughts here because I think the official way we do these Tanzu TV things is then we go check some stuff into GitHub and. I don't know. It'll be fun. The last version control thing I really used was Subversion. And, of course, underscores in PowerPoint files. I think I put an extra scoop of coffee in there. Anyhow, so I want to go over a few of these topics here. No need for me to cover it. But I think what you can do, if you let me just double check this here. Yeah, that's right. If you go to, I'll put it in the chat here. But you can add comments, check it out, whatever. And I think the way you're supposed to use this is use like the same URL every time, and then you just dump it off to your show notes or whatever it is people do. Now, this isn't a show intended only for developers and people who know what a Git is. So it's not like I'm going to go crazy here, but I think it's a good format. So first of all, just one small thing. I forget why I was thinking of this, but, several jobs ago, I worked at a large company, and people are always interested in sort of culture issues. If our job is to improve the way our organization does software, so we can improve our business and therefore improve our lives and all of that sort of stuff. Which that was a annoyingly quick walkthrough through some heavy stuff there, but. One of the things you're always getting to is like, let's be more respectful and treat people better. And I find that just don't be a jerk is not really good advice to give to people. And it's good to kind of cite some specific things. And for whatever reason, I was thinking of one that used to happen in a large company I worked with a lot. And that was, I think a very fair perspective that an individual has in a very large organization is that their job is to extract as much compensation and benefit from that organization as possible. I think the second thing that you should expect individuals in large organizations to do is they're just like looking for something to do during the day. Now, that's kind of dismissive, but seriously, have you ever tried to just fill days of time with things? It's maddening, right? Like you're going to run out of stuff to watch. You're going to have to hang out with your family. Your house can only get so clean. And so you sort of just need stuff to do. And so that's, you're going to hang out, you see people. And I think that's another huge part of the personal fulfillment that a job takes. And very low down is helping the shareholders, right? Essentially helping the corporate mission for each individual. Now, anyways, that's a whole other thing, how you can align those incentives well. But I think alignment kind of goes both ways, right? We're always obsessed with aligning individuals to these large corporate goals. But part of the reason it's difficult is the corporate goals are not always aligned to the individual. Anyhow, one thing that comes up when people are obsessed with their own compensation and the way they're doing things, but also sort of it mixes together with kind of authority and power structures, all those more or less caustic to instilling a creative, innovative way of doing things, or even to having a learning organization where you're constantly trying to improve and change things, as we're always hopefully aspiring to. Everyone has a rank or a title in most organizations. Now that I'm back at a very large organization, VMware having acquired Pivotal, I'm reminded the crazy ladders and career things that go on, right? And oftentimes, you've got your individual contributor, and there's career paths that go up through all this stuff, and you get weird titles. Like I am technically, well, not technically, I'm literally, my title went from director at Pivotal, which was ambiguous and weird, but sounds cool, right? To staff technologist 2. 2, not 1. Not just staff technologist. I don't even know if there's a 3, but I'm staff technologist 2. Someone in the software-defined talk community made a great joke. They were like, hopefully it's about wizard staffs, which I try to encourage. But anyways, it's a very long layup for a small anecdote. Back when I was at another large organization, and there was some kind of like rando person asking for help or stirring up trouble or sort of getting involved in my group's stuff. Oftentimes, senior people in my group would be like, who is this person, right? Like they're trying to figure out if they need to listen to this person. Like never mind what that person might be trying to say or what they might be offering. They're just trying to figure out if they need to listen to this person or if ignoring them will make trouble, or more importantly, not more importantly, but equally importantly, if listening to them will cause trouble as well. And I was remembering for whatever reason, the main way people would dismiss them is they would be like, oh, that's just some M1 or that's just some M2. And those were like the entry-level managerial positions, I think. And so their position would be, they're irrelevant because they're just like, according to their rank, they have no authority or standing. And if they're only at this lower level rank, they're inconsequential. So anything that I'm involved with them doesn't matter, which goes to show the importance of title. People use it as a shorthand for seeing if you should be listened to or considered. Now, I have no idea if having a 2 at the end of staff technologist would just make someone more interested in me or not. I'll have to report back on that. But obviously, I would suggest that if you are a manager or any other person and you find yourself even wondering what title position someone has, and especially if you're sort of dismissing or shading what it is you would do according to that, you're probably not really looking to transform how you're doing things, and you're kind of getting stuck on the old way of doing things. Now, being pragmatic, sure, you should probably also pay attention to it. Or more importantly, you should pay attention to who cares about you listening to this person, right? And if that is going to damage or help you. But it's just a small habit to pay attention to. Now, if you'll pardon, a little refresher here. I was watching Mark Heckler's first broadcast here on the Tanzu TV, and it was exciting. I love it when someone is like, and now I'm going to have some coffee. And he's always making jokes about that. He showed me, now that we don't travel, it's probably not that big of a deal, but he had his backup coffee. When you travel a lot, it's good to pack your own coffee. Or the other extreme is you can do what I do, and I just really lower my standards. But he said he had Starbucks VO things, little instant coffees, and that was the best emergency coffee that he had discovered. Anyhow, there's a great article. Let me bring it up here. In all places, LinkedIn. As always, I'm trying to figure out what the deal with LinkedIn is. It seems like people pay attention to it, and so it's something that should be paid attention to. But it's from I love something like a chief platform officer, but it's from one of the technology executives at Santander, or however you want to pronounce it. My Spanish is getting rusty over here in the Netherlands. But it's really worth looking into, and it's in those show notes. But there's 2 things I wanted to highlight. And what he goes over is kind of one of my favorite topics, right? Like, what's the difference between tech industry advice that you get and how normal tech companies work? And there's these 2 things that I think hit on some interesting things that I think are different for large organizations. And different in a crucial way because they have it, but 2, it's also troubling because they don't really think about it. Now, this framing he has of project versus product, I think is pretty good. It's a hard concept to give people, that when you're looking to improve the way you do software, you really need to move out of a project mentality. Now, I think this is also a mentality that we have just from how normal things are acquired in a company, right? Like I forget who it was, but I was listening to someone go over how IT is done in a large organization, and it's what you would expect. I mean, it's the same way that you, as an individual would probably do a bathroom remodel or something, right? Like you have an idea of what you want, and then you go out and you bid for a bunch of people. You ask for bids, you get assessments of what it was, and then they execute the project, and then they're done. Now, most people do IT projects, software projects like that, right? Like you have a set of requirements that you need, and you go out and ask people what they're going to pay for it. Things get a lot more complicated, as I'll go over with a lot of things, from vendors. And then you sort of like put all those things in effect and you're done with the project. And, there's some maintenance and you probably will want to extend the way you do features. Now, a product mentality is it hews a lot more to that idea of what we have. I mean, by virtue of the name, is we're creating a product or a continual service. And the software is just going to embody what that is. The features in it will be the embodiment of that. In the same way that if you look at tech companies, they have products that they're selling, and they're continually evolving them, and they have dedicated teams for them. And they don't think of it as like a fulfillment that we need to have, that we just implement these features and we're done and the bathroom's finished. So I think maybe us in the tech world, like we don't really explain this concept extremely well. And more of what we need are kind of examples from large organizations of what a project looks like versus what a product looks like. But I think the important thing to take away is that you really, if you have a dedicated team of developer people who are very familiar with the business that you're operating in, hopefully you have a product manager as well, and they know that business almost as well, if not as well as the actual business owners, then you're probably closer to a product mentality versus if they're reporting on statuses and they're implementing features that a business analyst or someone else has implemented. You don't want them to be construction workers. You want them to be part of fulfilling how the business is done. And the benefits of that is that your software fits much better to what it is you're delivering. So I made a great, messy explanation of, as you can see, what was a much more concise way of putting that. And I think part of what he's emphasizing is that from the infrastructure side, if you think about what it is you want your platform to provide, right? You want your platform to be the toolkit, all of the stuff and the services that these product teams are using, right? So you don't want part of their project that they're working on to be to build up that infrastructure. And instead, you want to provide infrastructure that's ready for them to use. And I think something that us non-public cloud people always hesitate from saying is basically being like, like public clouds work, where if I'm one of these product teams, I don't worry about building the various databases and infrastructure that I get from a public cloud. I do worry about something that us vendors like to say a lot, is I do worry about selecting and wiring together and managing all of these things, especially across clouds and on-premise and whatever. But essentially, I have, if I'm using public cloud, especially if I'm using one public cloud, I have a centralized platform that is standardized and shared, and it's a platform, right? And similarly, in large organizations, that's what you want to provide is a platform. Now, the issue that you have, and part of why there's this distinction of projects versus products and standardizing on a platform, but the trap that you get in very quickly is that because you've been doing projects for 5, 10, 15, 60 years, you've ended up building all these different types of infrastructure because you're fulfilling a project instead of thinking about how you're enabling all these products. And what you've done is you've built up a lot of tech debt is the wrong word, but we'll just call it that. You've built up a lot of tech debt in all of the infrastructure that you have. And chances are high, you'll be like, we got the mainframe that does this. We probably even have some like AS400s. We've got like 5 to 50 different stacks of software, and all of this stuff like isn't the same thing, and it causes a lot of issues, right? Like I remember talking with some rental car company, and they even had regional systems that they couldn't integrate together, right? And having rented from several rental car companies, you can really see that in effect when you move from country to country and you want to just like do something simple like update your information depending on where you are. Like, you're always going to these weird UIs that don't fit together. But I think this is something that I should just use his name. What's the name of this dude? Oh, I can't pronounce that, unfortunately, because I'm a dumb American. But, you know, this gets to something that I think is important to start paying attention to as you're getting better at software. And that is, how are we gardening all of these disparate platforms that we have out there, right? Like, how are we thinking about reducing down that tech debt? And I think the way to start with it, one, is to not really accept and put up with that you need to have all these separate systems that require all this extra care and feeding. And after this, I'll get to kind of a rant about thinking about not putting up with the state of things. But the other framing is like, and this is hard to hear, especially from a vendor, because we cause a lot of these problems in trying to get you to use our stacks. But you really need to get on top of the idea that the more variance you have in your infrastructure, the more variance you have in any of your IT is going to be the more problems that you have, right? Because if you have one system, you can focus all of your attention on improving that one system, keeping it upgraded, and making sure that you've got the features in it and that you've picked a good system. If you've got two systems, you have to spread that across two systems. If you've got three, you got four, so forth and so on. And what ends up happening is you have these multiple systems that are catering to different audiences, controlled by different groups, on different sort of like maturity cycles, which means you may or may not have budget for things. They fall behind. And all of a sudden you've got all these different systems that you have to deal with. And it doesn't really help anyone, especially if you're thinking about the software that you're doing, to have all this variance, right? You have to really work on thinking about reducing that variance and standardizing and centralizing as much as possible. Now, developers don't like this. And the reason they don't like it is because you always fall behind on having things most updated. Like I remember back in the rich internet application, the RIA days. You know, I worked a lot with SAP people, and they always wanted to use, like SAP actually was pretty good at having new features that you could use in there. But the problem was their organizations weren't upgrading their SAP stacks. Now, that has all sorts of reasons that comes with it. But it puts the developers in this position of not getting all the new stuff. Now, it's fun to get all the new stuff, but it's also really important to get the new stuff, like at the time, because all of a sudden you need a mobile application. Or nowadays, you want to have a new stack and new features because you want to do an event-based architecture, because you want to deal with a higher volume of data that you're getting from all your little IoT or like branch office things, or because you have to scale up because all of a sudden there's some sort of pandemic and you've got a lot more requests coming in for mail order groceries or for loan approvals, right? Like you want basically, as I think I've mentioned before, you want to constantly be having your infrastructure, your platform and training to really be ready for an unexpected thing. And the more variance that you have, right, the more of that you're going to be needing to do. But also, if you're not addressing this sort of technical debt of older systems that really aren't in that training mode where they're constantly improving and have new features to them, but also have the ability to be, I don't know, faster and better, then you're going to get caught with your old systems. And, you know, that's the worst time to be upgrading something, when you actually need something, right? It's really when nothing much is going on that you should spend time addressing that technical debt. Now, I saw a talk from Spring One Platform by, I think it was this guy, Adam, let me see in my notes here, at the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. And, you know, it'd be fun to ask him somehow, for some reason, he said they were given a year to address a lot of their technical debt, which set them up well when some new requirements came along. And there's been lots of stories from the likes of Tesco and Kroger and other people who had been spending time on digital transformation, and all of a sudden they actually needed these benefits, and it worked out well for them. Now, there's a bit of a mindset shift here, right? Like it's similar to security. Now, security doesn't require this mindset shift because we've seen the effects of bad things happening if you're not prepared. But I think hopefully something that we'll learn is that it's really important to make sure that you have a platform strategy, that your infrastructure is always improving and being set up better, whether it's like a platform as a service thing or whatnot, because eventually you're going to encounter what increasingly, I guess it's cynical, but kind of fits my idea of what IT should be doing. And IT should just be ready for basically handling a crisis, for handling catastrophic events, whether that's from competition that you weren't expecting, whether that's from new strategic plans to change how you're doing things, or whether that's from your macro headwinds and things where you have to adapt to things changing. And one of the things that IT needs to be focused on is how quickly can we change not only what IT is doing, but how quickly can we change the business? How quickly can we change the tool set that we have? And if the answer is just like a bunch of meetings to even figure that out, then it's time to really just work on fixing up your portfolio and doing things in a much better way. So anyhow, that's not one of the best put together understanding of that. But I think, if you want to look at that article, it's a pretty good, it kind of puts this idea together succinctly in the context of banking. And I think it really emphasizes a point that is hard, that can never be emphasized that much, is that if you have what you consider a legacy system, you should think about fixing it. And I would add on top that from an infrastructure person standpoint, right? The more variance that you're putting up with, the worse you're probably going to be, and you should really start to think about cleaning up your portfolio, which in my experience, no one ever does. That's why we have a lot of legacy concerns in app modernization. People just don't do it. But that's probably a poor idea. Now I'm going to take my commemorative Mark Heckler coffee sip here. So that brings me to another section here. I was watching yet another Spring One platform talk from one of our customers in Germany, Datev. Now, I've heard them called something like the Intuit of Germany, right? So they have a whole platform that accountants and tax preparation people use for their customers, kind of sort of like Intuit. But, I think if I remember, they're the second or third largest software company in Germany, and they're a SaaS, so forth and so on, SAP being the biggest. Sorry if I got that wrong. But I think it's important to establish, for people who aren't in Germany in that area, what their deal is. So overall, it's a good talk that goes over, I think, essentially the list of things that they changed when they wanted to improve the way that they did software. And I think there's something, there's a couple of things really worth highlighting in there. And the first thing is, that I see this over and over, is that you really have to focus on starting small, right? You can't really come in with that gigantic, squid of enterprise concerns looking to solve the whole problem all at once. And this gets emphasized a lot that yes, there are lofty goals that they have that fit with some, multi-year corporate strategy. But what they did instead, which we try to do with most of our customers, is, and it would be interesting to see, this would be a good mindset thing to go talk to all of the people involved in this, is how do you get to the point where you're doing this exercise and you believe in it, no matter what the exercise is. But the exercise is to pick some part of the business and actually go through and figure out what the goals of that part of the business are, right? What do we actually want to accomplish here, right? Contrary to what I was saying, it doesn't really matter that we would like to move over to using a container-based way and we want to shift to doing microservices, and even that we want to be more agile and release our software more frequently. But what is that in service of? What goals do we want to achieve? Now, I think, to use the old Sun Microsystems phrase, it's still the case that the answer is always going to be Java, or in this case, containers, or especially Tanzu, whatever the question was. But you more want to have this goal and set this goal because it will direct what you do and direct a lot of the rallying that you have and direct the person side of things, right? Because if you're just doing a technology refresh without a reason for doing it, I think it's really going to make that more complicated and difficult and failure prone, right? Because you're not going to have principles to go back on to help you guide the decisions that you're doing. So oftentimes what our customers end up doing is they really do go through a workshop where they start from the top of so in this business area, what priorities do we have? What things do we want to change, right? We want to improve customer experience so that, we retain customers and we grow account growth, right? Like, again, a very simple thing is often from retail banking and in stores, right? So we, the issue that we have is we don't have enough customers applying for bank accounts with us, and we've kind of found that that they kind of like come and investigate things, and it just takes them a long time to get signed up to kind of close. I guess you don't register for a bank, but signing up for one. So we like money. We want to make more money. The way we're going to do that is acquire more customers. And we've kind of figured out that there's some issues that we have with signing up customers. The process takes too long. Like if you remember the BT stuff I was going over yesterday or the day before, right? Like going through that wizard of just adding on that sports pass requires way too many steps, and people get kind of bored and confused. So what we should do is fix that process, fix the software that facilitates it, right? And it all starts with that business idea of we want to sell more of this sports pass thing. We want to get more people to sign up for a bank. We want to make that process easier, or whatever, right? And you really do need to narrow down to what those goals are and have that trickle down and drive the software that we're doing. Now, the other part of that, I think that I've sort of noticed organizations over the years kind of ensnaring themselves in is instead of generally starting that small, they want to solve everything all at once. They want to they're often charged with putting in place, this doesn't happen so much anymore. They don't use this phrase, but they're charged with putting in place a multi-year cloud strategy, right? Somehow they've come to the conclusion that they need to containerize everything, or that they need to move to public cloud, or that they need to do whatever. They need to replace the framework. And my feeling in talking with them, and I'll get to some of the issues that I think vendors have as well, is that they just they want to solve everything at once instead of just working on a project and seeing what happens, so to speak. And this especially comes out, I was thinking about, I was mentioning I was in an EBC, talking with a vendor about, showing them our whole suite of stuff in Tanzu land. And I've got another one coming up next week. And the ask that they always have is they always want you to not give a vendor pitch, which is always just sort of an odd thing to ask a vendor. I mean, I know what they're saying. What they're saying is don't sell to us hard. Instead, talk about your idea of how you solve the problem, your vision. Talk to us about what it means to do things in your style and how you've seen other people get through difficulties of switching over to that style of doing things, right? Which, is fine, right? But the issue that you often have in these EBC things is you can tell that they are considering how they're just going to rip and replace the entire way that they do things. And instead, I feel like what they should be focusing on, as kind of gets into this data talk, is maybe just pick an application that you have, ironically enough, a project, but pick an application that you have and have the vendor come in and really just work with you and go over how they would fix that application for you, right? And really start to pick apart when you're trying to modernize that application or you're trying to improve that application. Look at the entire end-to-end process and look at every single thing that would need to happen to deliver that. Now, you're going to end up with the need to completely replace your entire enterprise architecture, so to speak. But what you're going to do instead is you're going to find the things that actually need to change, and you're going to come up with those principles of what you need to do. So what's an example of this? Let me think. I think there's an insurance company. Let's make an amalgamation of examples that we have from case studies from insurance companies. We work with all sorts of them, from Allstate to Liberty Mutual to Allianz to all of these places. And what I've seen come out in those patterns, right? Like I like to use a Liberty Mutual pattern a lot, where they started a motorcycle insurance business in Australia. So they didn't start off necessarily, at least in this story, with just sort of like, we're going to replace our entire IT estate with like this way of doing containers. So we're going to bring in all the vendors and have them kind of pitch the way of doing this. There's a similar kind of story from Rabobank, where they had a platform for how they run their entire sort of online banking thing. And they wanted to replace that platform with something else. So they just brought in all the people to kind of go over how they would do it, which, is fine. But even in the case of Rabobank and of Liberty Mutual and other insurance companies, I think the way that they start, instead of kind of starting from the ground up, is they pick a business or an application and they start to go through and they say, all right, let's run this, right? Like, let's see what needs to happen for us to actually add this new feature in. And then if you remember to the BT example, right, they did this with that sports pass thing, right? They were like, now, we kind of know that the answer is going to be that we need to replace everything with a container-based way of doing things, and we're going to have we're going to have to integrate with legacy systems. But instead of sort of like speccing that out ahead of time and picking a vendor platform or a public cloud or whatever that we're going to do it and moving people over to that and training them how to do it, doing a waterfall approach to transformation, if you will, we're going to start to work on this project and see what happens, right? We're going to have, as they said, a lighthouse that shows actually what our requirements are so that when we do eventually have that big EVC, the big, as they say, dog and pony show, we actually have specific asks and specific things that we know need to be fixed, right? We don't really have these kind of vague notions of like, tell us how what problems other organizations have encountered and how they solve those, right? And instead, it's sort of like, I think the more productive thing to come to with the vendors would be, here's this one application that we have, whether it's something kind of big, like in a Liberty Mutual case, we want to stand up a new business, and here's all the software that we need to do. Or here is just something simple, like adding that, adding a new package of sports stuff to the cable bundle that someone has. And what we want to do is we want to know how you would help us solve that problem, right? Like how you would walk through doing that. But also, like, as we discover the issues that we have, how you can help us address that, right? So if you remember to the BT thing, right? Like, they needed to they wanted to run it in public cloud, and they needed a way of integrating with their private cloud data source for it, right? And so that's an issue that they had. And I think if you pick these small projects and you use them as sort of like tracers or lighthouses or ways of discovering what your actual requirements are, I think that's going to be not only better and more productive than sort of like starting from let's just replace this whole estate, this whole portfolio. But I think it's actually going to be faster, right? You're actually going to start showing value and start actually working on things like right away because you're replacing it. And I think it will require a mindset shift of what we need to do is discover actually what needs to change, right? And this is the third thing that I'm kind of been playing around with is it will start to tell you what you don't need to change, right? And one of the issues that you have a lot is, oh, we've got all these legacy things and we need to modernize them. But, I'm starting to think in many cases, like, you don't need to modernize them unless you need to modernize them, right? Like, it could be the case that you can just wrap an API around a mainframe. It could equally be the case that there's some part of mainframe logic that you need to extract. But somehow you need to figure out this balance of, let's not really like fix it until we know that we need to fix it or why we need to fix it. Now, going back to what I'm saying earlier, I was contradicting myself, right? Like, you also need to have this thing of like, let's kind of go through maybe, I don't know what the basis is, every 3 months, every 6 months, and kind of visit the systems we haven't changed and just kind of run through a scenario of like, let's say we did need to access this system and we needed to change something about it. How long would it take us to change that thing, right? And, I'd almost come up with a baseline of like, it should take you no more than, let's say, 3 months from knowing what the need is to actually getting it in production to just add something to it, right? And if it takes you more than 3 months to just like add access to whatever this legacy thing was, you probably should work on fixing that and figuring out what the issue is. Now, there's an example, I think, from our customer base that maybe is kind of like this, and that is, I think over in T-Mobile, one of the first things that they worked on was they worked on this one method, and I'm probably going to get this a little wrong, but it was basically like the method that you would call to get someone's current data usage to kind of see, if they should be charged more or not. I don't know if that's exactly what it was, but that kind of granularity is like a good thing to think about, right? So if you have a customer system and maybe one of the checks, and maybe this is as I'm thinking about it out loud, what you want to do for this constant health check every 3 to 6 months is come up with like 3 to 5 common things that happen in this business, right? And so from a cell phone plan, common things would be billing, right? So let's collect usage. Another common thing would be like, what if someone wanted to change their plan, right? So just adding a new feature or downgrading a feature is another scenario, and so forth and so on. And it's probably a good thing to revisit how long would it take us to change the way that works, right? To, I don't know what the change would be, or in the case of cell phone things, to add new plans, right? And adding a new plan, I mean, I don't think it should take that long. And, you know, I remember in systems I've been in, we would launch new products in some organizations, and we could literally not accept business from people because we couldn't add a new product to the back end because we had missed some window to add a SKU or something absurd about that, right? And that should be an indication that, like, something's wrong, right? If you can't add a new product in 3 months that you can sell wherever, something is terribly wrong and it needs to be fixed and modernized. So that's almost, I think, to combine together these two things, right? Like, don't start off thinking that you need to go to all of these vendors and get your CTOs and architects spun up to kind of just go evaluate all the options to change everything. I mean, instead, I would really just start with a handful of projects and start to use those as tracers to figure out what we need to change. What are the new requirements that we have? And use that then at some point, maybe after 6 or 12 months, to maybe kind of go out and gather up a broader sort of organization-wide change that you have. But really kind of discover what you actually need instead of just assuming that you're going to be swapping out one-to-one these things. Now, on the vendor side, you know, we're not really the best at that because we want to sell you the biggest possible dollar amount of a deal, which means we want to have the biggest sort of portfolio change that we can get. So, you know, you should control us about that. You shouldn't let us, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to go for the biggest deal possible as soon as possible. And instead, it's probably better for you as the buyers to really emphasize that we want to start small with this project. And we want you to kind of help us out along the way. Or, you know, you can also, if the vendor's not interested, you can say, all right, well, once we've kind of figured out what our requirements are by starting small, we will bring you back, and we're happy to have you take us out to lunch and get a status on what's going on. But until we've kind of experienced a couple of projects that we're doing, if you're not interested in helping us out along the way, then we're not really going to bring you in until much later in the process when we kind of actually know what we need for that large estate. So I think there's some, you know, plenty of other good things in that DATEV talk. And again, like most all Spring One platform talks, it's actually very short and very quick to go through if you kind of pay attention to it quickly. So finally, what I want to go over is VMworld is going on this week. Hopefully, I mean, I had a maximum, I think, of 6 viewers live for this, and now I'm down to 2 for the live broadcast. So I'm pretty sure I'm not distracting from people paying attention to VMworld. But I went and watched the sort of Tanzu part of it, and thankfully, we can just go on our internal part and just instantly see the videos. I haven't really tried to register for things and go look at them, but you can probably do that more or less easily. But to kind of give you a summary of what was going on in the Tanzu area, there's 3 talks that I think from Ajay and James Waters and Dormains, just to highlight, and kind of to the point of what I was talking about, right? Like, I think if you see these talks, when you're watching them, what I would pay attention to is the vision's a difficult world, but kind of our worldview in Tanzu of what we think software development, what software as a product, what innovation for business ends up looking like, both at a stack level. We don't really, you know, in this part, we didn't really go over like the agile part of it, the actual development, but what it looks like from an infrastructure level, right? And how that kind of shows itself. And with this first stack here, let's see. I think I can I zoom in? Woo! Look at that. That's super fancy. But the critical thing that we've been working on for a while, and now that we have Pivotal and VMware and Heptio and Bitnami and Wavefront, and apologies, I'm probably forgetting one of the other things, but all of the parts together. One of the main things we've been working on for a long time is, a huge amount of workloads and IT runs on vSphere, on VMware, right? And I don't know. I mean, there's an exact figure, but it's so big that it doesn't really matter because chances are you have it and you're running on it. And the key thing is that if you're considering using Kubernetes, right, like it's just part of vSphere. It's, the most recent version of vSphere. You used to have VMware Cloud Foundation or VCF, which is sort of a different level of it. But now it's really easy for people who are familiar with vSphere, the VI admins, to just add that in, right? Now, if you think about what I was advising about starting small, I think what's crucial here is that at the infrastructure layer, you can start small in the sense of with these developers who are working on our project, I can just sort of I don't have to do anything that's a big deal. They can just use Kubernetes and we can see if that works out for them. I can experiment with giving them just baseline Kubernetes. I can experiment with policy management for it. I can experiment with all sorts of ideas of ways they might want to operate, right? So I can just have that. And I don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about how Kubernetes would be used and how I would stand it up. It's just there for you to try to use to start experimenting with. And I think that's where the kind of additions stuff, the way of packaging up comes into play, is depending on how I want to start experimenting, how I want to start small, I can kind of go through those various things. Now, clearly, you're going to end up wanting the entire stack of things that we have to manage it, the distro that you're going to be running, to do a multi-cloud management, and really to have the full-on platform as a service, the full-on developer stack and everything that comes with it. But, you can start small and start with the smaller part of it. And I would really you really should, if you're in the infrastructure area, I would go, instead of thinking about oh, we've got Kubernetes or we've got containers set up for you, I would find some of those software people. I guarantee you they're around. They may not like you. You may not like them, like in that bar in Star Wars. But go out there and find people who are interested in running their application in a containerized way. They're interested in using microservices. And if you're a manager or an executive, just set up a couple of VI admins who are curious and just go and say hey, we want to manage containers for you, right? I mean, if you think about it, this is a very lean startup approach. Go find your market, right? You have infrastructure and responsibility, and go find the product customer fit. Find the developers and just ask them what they need and see if providing them this kind of Kubernetes works out for them, or if using the multi-cloud management across, wherever the public clouds and other infrastructure they have, if that works out for them. And really, if you're not familiar with a lean startup approach, right? What it means is going and trying out different things that you're giving them, studying their reaction to it, and really discovering what your customers need and constantly pivoting the offering that you're doing to fit what they need, which again, is another reason why starting small with these tracers projects instead of just boom, a new platform is really important. Because in my experience, no matter how many EVCs you go to, or gigantic spreadsheets you have, or vendors who come in and tell you why their complete stack and their vision, their macro level vision, you've always got a vendor who comes in with the one slide that represents conveniently everything in their portfolio and how it services what your needs are, how it all kind of fits together. You've always got these chevrons going all directions that do things. Now, there definitely is a time and a place for that. Again, like I was saying, when you figure out what you actually need, you want to see how much what you need maps on to that everything slide. But at first, you want to go in knowing here are, you're not going to know what it is, right? You're not going to be able to make that gigantic matrix spreadsheet to compare everything. And you really need to have some of those actual tracers, those small projects to go through and discover what those things are. And I think that's a lot of what we have here. We give you the tools that you can kind of start at any level and layer up to doing that. So if you're in the infrastructure area and, chances are you have this, you should take these tools and go around, if you find some Java people, Spring people, and you can start to learn what those columns in your matrix spreadsheet are going to be. If you want to use rows or columns, doesn't really matter. but you need to start figuring out what the requirements for that product are, and you can kind of start with that. Now, getting more and more into it, right? Like the full-on vision, I was just kind of making fun of the full-on vision, but the full-on thing that we have in Tanzu land, this is kind of the vision that we find people shoot for, right? Like you've got that infrastructure underneath there, and on top of here's the common things that we find people ending up wanting to do, right? And if you watch, Waters going over this, he does a good job of explaining it. But these are increasingly kind of like the components. If you remember all the way back to the beginning of this little episode here, the standardized, centralized, shared things that people end up wanting to have. But again, I personally, and what I would recommend is you should discover these things on your own. You should validate this architecture that we're suggesting, this set of needs, by starting off with those small projects. Now, even more highly, so my core worker, Dormains, had I think a pretty good overview of like really, I think this is, if you were forced to pick one core thing to focus on with all of this, with all of your digital transformation as getting better at software, I think what the infrastructure people, what developers, anyone who considers themselves enabling improving the business with software, again, there's many things, but this is the one thing that I would really focus on, and again this comes up, is focus on waste in the system, focus on wait time, focus on handoffs. Really think about, and again, this is why it's good to start with those small projects, where are the areas where you have to stop, where things don't flow through the system, right? And she kind of illustrates this kind of in a burn downy chart kind of way, right? I hadn't actually thought about this chart, but it is I like this astonished look on her face because she's basically like, we discovered something terrible. But, this is kind of that burn as an interesting chart. It's kind of like a Gantt chart and a burn down chart all at once. But you're sort of burning down the required tasks that you have. And you can see you've got this wait time. This is probably talking with database people. And then here is getting like a port opened or, whatever you might need to do. And I think really as infrastructure people, one of the best things you can do initially is remove this waste time. Always ask, like, what are we waiting for? And when you're doing these initial projects, this wait time, the longer each step takes, these are the areas that more than likely you're going to find need to be improved. Now, mainframes are always a thing, right? Like if one of these steps is a mainframe and it's actually not that big of a deal to wait around for whatever you need, maybe you don't need to fix it, right? Like maybe it's good enough to wrap an API around it and it's perfectly fine. So you don't need to worry about that, right? Like, but until you discover what all these little boxes are, and then the white boxes. Now, just a little chart tip, I would have made those red, but then also red is kind of difficult to show up on some screens, and these are actually kind of some calming features, calming colors. But you want to focus on solving these problems, and it's almost like these problems are what you bring to that EBC 6 or 12 months later, and you ask how you solve these things. So again, as Dormains says, as infrastructure people, when you're planning things out, right, like find the developers, go through applications with them. And hopefully, if your developers haven't found the business that they're representing, those are the wrong developers. You need to find the developers that are working very closely with the business side. So find the business and the developers, find out what these white bars are, and start to understand that, as she says, their success is your success, right? Like if you ever find yourself thinking or kind of having a meeting with each other and you're like, our job is just to deliver this platform. And if those jokers, or to use a phrase that's come up in American politics recently, those clowns can't really figure out things on their own, it's not our fault. We deliver the infrastructure. That's not cool, man and woman and them and they. Like, you should really understand that unless the developers, unless the business is successful, then you're doing a poor job, no matter what you may be coming up with. So I would really recommend looking at those 3 talks. They're pretty good as far as representing what Tanzu is, what our vision for doing things are. And I think Dormains really does a nice job bringing it together of like why, right? Like what you want the developers to look at. So yesterday, if you recall, there was I had an interview kind of going over what the developer stack looked like, not the developer stack, what the Kubernetes world looks like for developers. And I think we really I had the manager here, and you can see my kids had a great cameo as well. But he does community management for us, and we really discussed a great overview of the different types of developers, the different parts of the Kubernetes community, and not only what those parts are, but what I wanted to really focus on. There's my son, just kind of sneaking in there, very exciting. But what we really started to focus on, I think, is how you can start working with the community, right? Like if you want to be involved in it and you want to contribute, not only code-wise, but also documentation-wise, also vendor-wise, and also user-wise, what you can start doing with it. Now, a topic that we didn't get to that I want to think about more and discuss more is, if you have an understanding of the Kubernetes community and the open source project, how does this affect how you think about the next 5 to 10 years of your IT strategy, of that big platform that you're providing to your customers, to the developers and the developers who are, and the business who's working with the developers? How does your understanding of how the Kubernetes community work fit into that, right? Like, if you should really, it's probably a good idea if you're relying on some piece of software, even if you have that kind of vendor insulation, that vendor layer added in there, you need to think about how that community works and how you can get engaged in it, and how you can continually check on the health of that community, because it's going to be something that you rely on. And I don't think we really talked about that aspect very much. And I think there might be some people who are in the Kubernetes community that come from the, let's call them user world, the enterprise world, that would be fun to talk with about that. Like, there's someone else who does community management from Apple that we were talking about. And I think discussing this topic with that person would be interested, because as you know from job post listing and things, Kubernetes is used over there in Apple land, and I suppose I should talk to our customer base about that, which would be fun. So anyways, check out that talk. It wasn't at the usual time. And then finally, I might as well end up with some CTAs, as they call, some calls to action. So I want to try 3 things, and I'm just totally lifting this out from James Waters' talk. And so if you're interested in all of this stuff, and sorry that I'm doing a vendor pitch when perhaps you don't want a vendor pitch, but whatever, I got to do a little bit of hustle. Now, if we have actually like a lot of great free courses that you can sign up for and look at over at Kube Academy. You can go check that out. There's new ones being added that are kind of like not only talking with VI admins, but also increasingly developers about understanding Kubernetes. Now, we've got a whole other site over there, the developer portal, which I'm going to start doing some, we're going to start an Agile area over there. And I'm going to start kind of contributing some type of the sort of meatware type of stuff we have there. And I think our Pivotal Labs people, who have a tremendous amount of material and learnings that they share, they'll start having their stuff surface there as well. But also, if you think about that kind of discovering actual applications and business value. So we do a lot of workshops, discovery workshops for that, and you can sign up. You can kind of ask us to help facilitate some of that. And also, I should have some people come on. Like, I talked with Robbie a couple episodes back about doing this, but I'd really like to kind of get on tape, even if you don't want us to come in and do that with you. And we are a vendor, so obviously we're trying to get you to work further with us. But I'd really like to kind of document, like, here is at least someone walking through if you wanted to do this on your own to kind of bootstrap it, kind of figuring that out. But for now, if you go to Coté.pizza, one of the, I'll show you here, but one of the things we have on there, and Coté.pizza is just like an easier URL for me to give out than whatever, as you'll see, the actual URL is. But if you want to go there, you can kind of ask, you can go into our machine and ask to do some office hours to kind of sort through doing that. And, I think that's a good way. It is, you're talking to a vendor, obviously, but it's a good way to start to think about, like, how would we find that one application? How would we even find the things that we want to do to kind of, instead of having that gigantic way of doing things, to really use actually doing some projects to start to discover what that entire estate switchover will look like and have a much better risk managed way of doing it. Now, finally, I've used my daughter riding a bike for a little bit of commentary there. So I wanted to actually show you before I wrap up here, her riding a bike. If you were wondering, it actually happens. It's a very short clip because I was doing this video and I heard some dinging behind me and I was clogging up the road. And, one of my fellow bike riders wanted me to get out of the way. But you can see, she's got her skills here. Doing pretty good. Pretty good. You can hear the ding. Put down the video. But there's proof that you can change. You can learn new things. And you can transform from training wheels to full-on biking. So with that, thanks as always for watching. Now, I know most people don't watch this live, which is fine. But if you're into this kind of thing, it would be great if you help spread it out and encourage other people to look at it. If it's too vindery for you, I apologize. But if you go to tanzu.tv, you can find the archives for this. I'm finally getting all of the access I need to put the full-on archives up there and the show notes. Which I think what I'll be able to do is go through, the show notes I've been walking through and just basically put them up there. And I try to broadcast every day at 11 a.m. Amsterdam time, unless I schedule with someone else, in which case I'll update the schedule. But definitely just, I subscribe to our Twitch thing at twitch.tv/VMware Tanzu to get notified of things. And that's all the hustling I have the energy to do at the moment. So I'll see everyone next time. Thanks.